In the name of God, who keeps us and cares for us, both outwardly in our bodies and inwardly in our souls. Amen. First, I want to congratulate you on getting here, and on time, even more impressive. And I want to congratulate you on getting through that gospel. At 8 o'clock, it's kind of fun. We can sit up here and watch people get through that at 8 o'clock. And about halfway through the gospel, folks stop reading and put it down and kind of look at the ceiling, just totally exasperated, some furrowed brows. So well done getting through that. This week, this past Wednesday, we celebrated our eldest son's 22nd birthday. And we can't help but, in the midst of the week, think about those 22 years. We think about times that have been great, times that have been really hard, and particularly thinking about those times when Isaac first arrived to us, and remembering just the exhaustion on the one hand of having a newborn in the house, and remembering really the poignancy of the it's not quite frustration, but it's the sense of inadequacy at caring for this new person in the house who cannot tell us what they need. All they can do is weep and wail and scream and flail occasionally. And we would basically just guess at what the need was. And those who've experienced this know it's trial and error. That sounds maybe like a hungry or a thirsty, or that sounds maybe like a wet diaper, or that sounds maybe like you're scared to death, or that sounds like maybe you're tired. And the parental response is to just kind of try things and experiment a little bit to see if you can't maybe hit it on the nose and meet the need. And that goes on for a good time, right? Longer than actually feels great, not knowing exactly what the little one needs. And in a sense, then there's a lot of formation happening there, right? Both for parent and for child. For the child, of course, they're learning the best ways to express need, pre-verbal, and parents are just sort of like water over stone, managing their own issues of inadequacy, their own anxieties about, am I good enough? Am I going to be able to make this work? And so parent and child mature and change together. And then there's this magical day when, for the very first time, Isaac says, actually said Dada first, then Mama, but to even just say, who do I want? Aside from what do I want, who do I want? And then, of course, the language shows up like drink or food. And all of a sudden, we've got a verbal relationship, right? Where it's more clear what the need is, and that makes my job easier. I would think it makes Isaac's experience better, not having to wait for me to figure it out. And then there's that developmental phase where we're learning to communicate with each other, right? The real specificity of the need, if you want the need met quickly, is helpful. And parent and child both learn that. Tell me, what do you want? What do you want? What do you need? And we come to discover that is not just in those first months and years, but that it's a lifelong project, right? As they enter grade school, and then as they enter high school, as they launch, as they imagine a career, as they live through the experiences of great joy and celebration, and the equal experience of deep devastation and heartbreak, to have them learn how to say what's happening in them All those things that a person wouldn't just know, they know it because it's in them, or at least they can intuit it. And the trick in all of that process of learning to figure out what's going on in us is on the one hand to make sure that the world around us knows what's happening within me. What are my needs and my wants? But even more specifically for him, to learn to get more clear. What's this thing I'm feeling? I don't know how to make sense of this thing I'm feeling. Kind of hurts, kind of scary. Whatever it is, the hard stuff. They have to learn how to not only discern what the thing is, but what is the word that is most helpful to communicate that feeling. It's lifelong. It is a lifelong process. I suspect many of us are still on that learning curve if we're honest about it. I shared at 8 o'clock this morning, I have just recently in the last couple of months become a practitioner of yoga. And there's a whole slew of needs and wants that I have felt or thought that I didn't have language for. And now all of a sudden I've got practitioners around me and teachers who've got language to say, here's that thing that when you feel that thing in your jaw, or when you're pushing your tongue on the top of your mouth, or when you back away from something, or when your breath speeds up, here's language that we use together to understand what's happening in you. And maybe you'll find that language to be helpful, not only for you to understand what's happening inside you, but to be able to communicate to others around you what's happening, so you can be in maybe a better relationship with them, a healthier relationship with them, and with your own thoughts and feelings and body. Right? So not only have I discovered that there's thoughts that I had I didn't have language for, but there's feelings and there's embodied stuff with my body holding on to stuff I didn't know about. And so to learn that I'm, believe it or not, probably like all of you, an actual whole person, body, mind, and spirit, and how wonderful it is to have language for that now, and to be continuing to develop language for that. It's the case in the church, particularly for clergy persons in the church, that it's assumed that we're going to a counselor, so we're learning language about what's happening inside us and around us at an emotional level. Most of us have spiritual directors, so we're talking about what's happening in us and around us at a spiritual level. Hopefully many of us are tending to the cares and concerns of our physicality, so maybe we're developing language around that as well. And that is good, and it's really important. And it's been absolutely clear to me, particularly since developing the practice of yoga, that it's practice, right? That we don't come to learn language for body, mind, or spirit, right? The realities of our internal lives and how they connect to the life around us without practicing it. You have to do the thing so that you know the landscape of the body. You have to get into the mind so that you know the landscape of the mind, and one has to tend to their spiritual life enough to know the landscape of your spiritual life. We have to know who are these creatures who meet us out in the wilderness. It's helpful to be able to discern angels from demons who join us in the wilderness. It's helpful to understand hungers and thirsts and various motivations, and why am I being tempted with this thing that nobody else seems to be tempted, or what's that about? It's just about familiarity with us, with ourselves as whole people, and the degree to which we have language, not only to communicate it to ourselves, but to the world around us, all the better. But it is first and foremost sort of the human discipline of practicing familiarity with our whole lives, our inner lives and our outer lives. And it's developmental. Right? It takes time. We learn new language. We have new experiences we need to communicate. And over the course of time, we get better at it. Right? Something we can get better at. The stories that we have this morning indicate something of the developmental nature of naming need, naming want. It is immediately after the great Exodus, where those who've chosen to get up and leave, which we should remember, the backdrop is that this is a minority opinion who got up and left Egypt to go on Exodus and try a new thing, because the security of Egypt was a felt need. We don't like it, but it's satisfying a need that we hadn't named for ourselves. But now out in the wilderness, we're discovering, man, we are thirsty and we don't know where our water is coming from. At least in captivity, we knew where our next drink was going to come from. But now out here in the wilderness, this new anxiety is showing up, and we're thirsty and we don't know what to do with that, right? And so they grumble immediately. They're free and they are immediately grumbling. And there's no judgment in that. It's just the reality of us. We've got a new experience. We thought we wanted to be free, but now we come to discover that liberation and the freedom that comes with liberation creates new anxieties. And now we've got to learn about that reality and how we communicate it with ourselves and with the world around us. And what a wonderful thing, right? I mean, I would hope we'd read this story with a sense of humor. That what a great discovery that we're actually not as confident in this adventure as we were yesterday. Right? Because today we're thirsty and we don't know where the water's coming from. It's a great story, right? And I want to claim that as a sort of prototypical for us, that we should know that we are constantly being invited into picking up and moving, right? The Exodus narrative is our narrative on a regular basis, every single day, picking up and moving, because our God, though we would love our God to be a stationary God who is fixed and forever the same, we know that our God is a God who moves and evolves and changes and invites us into that life that is forever unfolding unto the kingdom. And we've got to be honest with ourselves. That's a big ask. That's a big ask for those of us who like snapshots, who love the security of place, who love the security of a fixed group of people and even a fixed set of practices, to be asked again, are you interested in picking up and going on a new adventure where you don't know where your next drink is going to come from? How many of us, be honest, would say thanks but no thanks? Right? We have arrived, we're set, we're not moving. And guess what? We'd be in good company. Most folks didn't get up and move. The second story out of the gospel is curious, and I won't preach this the way some folks go off on this. I want to preach this as the value again of the outsider, who not only doesn't have the benefit of the insider set of practices and expectations for the right practice of Judaism, but they're actually judged by that, right? We're not in Jerusalem where religion is done right. We're among the Samaritans, who are not only a suspicious crew of people themselves, but their religion is watered down at best and probably just wrong, according to Jerusalem. And yet, here we have a Samaritan woman who has language to talk about thirst, right? The language of the tradition, to talk about thirst. And from an outsider's perspective, to say, hey, you know what? I would love it if I didn't have to keep doing this, right? She's actually clear about her captivity. She's clear that she has to keep coming to do this, that she doesn't want to come do this. She'd rather do anything else. In fact, she's happy to leave her bucket and go tell everybody else that this new thing that we've been waiting for has arrived. And why don't we all pick up and get ready to move, because we don't have to keep doing this thing that we aren't very good at anyways. We're constantly judged against its measure. And we've got a new fulfillment of this thirst that isn't about physical thirst purely, but this is that deep thirst that we all talk about, right? That deep sense of security, that deep sense of assurance that when we agree to pick up and leave those things that are familiar to us, place, people, practices that are familiar to us, that God will be there with us. Even when we pick up and do this crazy thing to say, yes, God, we hear you calling us to a new thing and we're going to do it. Guess what? The person who's calling us to that is here, right? And though this is from John, we're in the year of Matthew, and Matthew is interested in making sure that we know about Jesus as the new Moses, the new leader of deliverance. And guess what? I think we have found him. And so she gets in this great debate with Jesus, who actually takes the question and says, well, why don't you give me some water? Let's talk about water. How do you understand water? And she gets to say, well, water's important, but I would love it if there was actually this deeper satisfaction to life, right? Because there's got to be more than this. There's got to be more than the regular rhythm of coming back to do this same routine every single day. There's got to be more than this. And she receives the assurance that she desires. She goes back and tells everybody the new reality is unfolding among us, that we no longer have to be judged against those places and people and practices that we're not doing, because guess what? God has assured us that God will be with us in our place, with our people, with the practices that we have developed to be in relationship with that God. This is revolutionary. This is revolutionary. So she demonstrates to us the gift of getting to name need, right? She could have settled for water, and she said, no, I've actually got a need that's way more than water, right? I'm thirsty for sure. My folks are thirsty for sure. But what we really want is that the assurance that God is among us, right, to fulfill the great question from the Old Testament. Lent is forever a season of deep introspection. It's also a season of practices, some of which are just kind of goofy and fun, some of which are provocative, some of which are wildly challenging. But it's nonetheless a season where we imagine that we're being invited into some new thing, that there's something new happening, and that more importantly, before that new thing can happen, we have to let go of any number of things that are holding us captive, thus the centrality of the Exodus narrative for us. The assumption that there's some captivity that is holding us hostage that we may know about, we may know what it is, and we may not. We may have language for it, but we probably don't actually have language for it. Because if we did, we'd name it for ourselves and for others, and then we'd probably line up some actions to do something about it, like getting up and leaving Egypt and leaving captivity. But my guess is most of us find ourselves in that funny spot where we may be driven by thirsts and hungers that we don't understand. And I want to say that is okay. That is normal. It is part of the human experience, and more specifically, it's part of the Lenten project, right? That when we talk about sin or sins and that sort of stuff, I'm not particularly interested in chocolate, or your chocolate consumption, or how much you're working out, or how much you're journaling or reading. What I'm interested in, and quite honestly, what I think God is interested in, is what are those things that are holding us captive? Things known and unknown. Obviously, the stuff that's known, we need to do something about it. That's just about having a moral conscience that functions. But the stuff that is unknown, I actually think is much more interesting. And I think it's interesting because it's hard, it's scary, it demands the best of us, it demands that we take some risk to figure out why we are the way we are. And sometimes we learn things that are unflattering about ourselves and about each other, and that can be scary, right? In a culture and in a religion where performance matters. This is asking us to drop all that, to drop all the facades, those that we carry for ourselves and those that we hold up between ourselves and others, and it asks us to be honest. It asks us to develop language that we may still feel like we're just weeping and wailing and screaming and flailing and acting poorly because we're so frustrated that we can't name the thing that we need or want. And it says, just take a little time and just get clear on the thing. What is the need? What is the want? What is the deep thirst that is driving you? What is the deep hunger that is keeping you up at night? And ask yourself, is this still working for me? Is this still working for the people I love and the people I'm friends with and the people I go to church with? We are, each of us, a work in process, right? Is there disagreement about that? Or are we all comfortable with that notion that we're a work in process? And this Lent is simply another opportunity to think about one of those things that is keeping you in your own life, or your professional life, or your family life, or your educational life, or your ecclesial life. It asks you to think about those things that are keeping you stuck. And by stuck, there's some specificity to that. It means stuck in a way where you don't imagine that God could still be with you if you laid all of the trappings aside. If you laid all the patterns and practices of your life in captivity, as it presently exists, aside, do you believe that God would still be there with you? It invites questions about career. Certainly with my kids, it invites always questions about course of study. It invites questions about friendship networks. It invites questions about various addictions. It invites questions about relationships that no longer serve us in a healthy way, right? It calls into question every pattern of captivity that we're part of. And it asks it in a gentle way. Is it still working for you? Were it gone, would you believe that God is still there with you? If you hungered and thirsted for a day outside of Egypt, would you still be singing and celebrating with Miriam, or would you be grumbling with the rest? I don't need to prescribe any of that, right? The text just invites it. The season invites it. Just to pay attention. Are you being driven by angels, or have you been met in the wilderness only with the little devils? How do you discern the difference? What does freedom and the fullness of life look like for you? What do you need to hear and experience and feel from God to have utter assurance that God is with you today and forever? That's the question for us today, for the week, for the season. I'll pray for you as you do the deep dive, and I hope you'll pray for me as well. And I hope you'll pray for all of us here at the cathedral together. Amen.